Welcome to Date with Danu, the Naked Truth edition. Today we'll be speaking about being positive about HIV. And as my guest today on the show, I have Sriyal.
Hi, my name is Sriyal Nilanka and I am currently working as a program officer on an HIV prevention project with the Family Planning Association. Date with Danu has been an entertaining show, but also it has created a platform where Danu brings people who are part of a marginalized community and giving them a voice, which I think is a great initiative that he has done. And as a part of that initiative, I'm here. So I am someone who's living with HIV and it's been about 7 years. Currently, my work and Niluka's work revolves around providing access to community members as well as people who are living with HIV, and we support the government initiatives on HIV prevention. So our work is both advocacy and also on a policy level, but also we go down to the grassroots level of empowering communities in order to sort of support the HIV prevention project that currently Sri Lanka is carrying out. So I've seen Danu in the papers and on TV, and I had the opportunity to once meet him while there was an exhibition. He's a lively person, he's taller than I expected, which was quite nice, and I was quite humbled when he asked if I could come and speak on the show. So I think the platform that he has created and the opportunities that he is creating by extending our voices is amazing and commendable.
We're back on the big seat here, and we wanted to speak a little bit about HIV, and I have someone who is living with it and who is very positive about it, Sriyal, on the show as we speak about the naked truth behind all of this. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me, Danu.
So we'll get into the truth of all of this.
Yes.
So you're living with HIV,
Yes.
and for the past how long?
It's closing upon 8 years now.
8 years.
Yes.
And how has life changed?
It's changed completely from before my diagnosis to now. Who I am, what I have been doing over the past 8 years, it's all completely changed. I have a purpose that I didn't have before.
Mm. And you know, something that we always tell ourselves, it could be COVID-19, it could be diabetes, it could be anything. We always say, it'll never come to us.
Right.
We'll never get it. It's not something that's for us. Even if it's a heart attack, we always say, no, I go to the gym, no. That's always that little, we always justified. How was it for you?
Well, I mean, at the time, I didn't think that it would happen to me, much like everyone else. But, and this was 8 years ago, so things were fairly different to what it is right now.
Mm.
There were people who were talking about it, but they weren't in the same circles that I ran in. And so I was extremely isolated at the time. I had my best friend who sort of went with me for all the tests and doctor's appointments. I did multiple tests just to make sure.
Yeah.
She stood by me through my attempted suicides and got me into therapy, supported me when I spoke to my parents about it. So it came to a point where I had to tell them. So it's been a journey. I mean, it's still a journey, but now I've been more comfortable with my status, and I am using it to find purpose in my life.
All right. This is just the basic outline to what we are talking about. There's so much to it. As we'll get on with the show, you'll come to know about it. But there are different layers of this problem. Speaking to your parents is one thing. Speaking to your friends about it is another thing. The opportunity cost is something that is very, very crucial. Finding a job today, it could be anything related to anything that's different to the norm that we are exposed to. It could be a gender issue, it could be an identification issue, it could be a religious issue. Anything that is different to the norm, it becomes such a crippling issue when it comes to the host society, and maybe if it's an organization that's trying to take you in. How was it for you when you had to battle it within yourself and tell yourself that you will have to kind of explain yourself to a lot of people?
I had two options. I had the option of not talking about it, but
And being extremely just to yourself.
yeah, going back into another closet, because I've been open about my sexual orientation since I was 16,
Okay.
and then I expanded the kind of people that I was coming out to, and then I was around 23, 24 when I became positive. At that time I realized that I wasn't able to talk about it at the time. However, down the line, I'm not going to go back and confine myself into another sort of life of secrecy, where I have to watch my step or date someone only to kind of realize that my HIV status was a big problem. It also came from a place of, I would say, some selfishness also. I was putting my feelings forward. It was this sort of disclaimer that was there, which said, I am HIV positive, and if you walk through this, you come in with the understanding and acceptance of that. And beyond that, you get to know me. So I already screened people, friends, potential partners. They were screened, people with sort of a level of,
Let's put it as intelligence.
level of knowledge and
Yeah.
awareness were sort of screened through it, or people who were willing to learn through it were welcome.
Do you blame the people who are ignorant about this situation still in 2020?
No, I don't. I mean, I don't, because there's so much of information out there, yes, and there is so much of ways of getting it, but what matters is if it affects you or someone that you know or your community, that's when we kind of get to know or understand something. I mean, COVID is such a widely spoken thing because it affects people.
Everyone.
Exactly.
And HIV also can affect everyone.
It can affect everyone. However, we have to accept the fact that there are certain communities that are affected more than other communities.
Yeah.
And going forward, I want to say, like, this is my story and this is my experience. It does not represent everyone who is living with HIV, especially in Sri Lanka. I have been privileged to have the life that I have had and make the choices that I have made. But it's just, it sheds light on a certain kind of point of view.
How I got involved in this topic was last year when Hans Bilimorea, who champions grassroots trust and works with a lot of sexual issues in our country, where people do not have the will or the urge to speak about it as much as we would have to, put this script in front of me and said, I've been trying to write this script for the past 9 years, and I really want you to play this. And I was like, okay. I always like these atrocious scripts that he gives me, but this was not an atrocious script. This was one of those very painful scripts for me to even memorize, because it had a lot of technical terms with it which I didn't understand, which also gave me an insight to come to know more about what HIV is in our country and across the world. We have to date back to the 80s when the first case of HIV was detected in Sri Lanka, and how people reacted to it was, today we can actually view it as a hilarious past. But we'll talk more about it, of course, when we do come back, because I really want to tell you the story how HIV, when there is no proper education given, how it can actually affect someone. When we do come back, I'll share my story with you right here on Date with Danu.
So my name is Niluka Perera, and I work as the Communications and Coordination Officer of something called the Global Fund Advocates Network Asia Pacific. It's a network of advocates working towards HIV, tuberculosis and malaria responses very closely with an entity called the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, Tuberculosis and Malaria. I think The show Date with Danu is a really good platform to talk about issues that are rarely spoken or spoken in a taboo sense. This provides a really good platform to talk about things that are really true, but people find it uncomfortable to talk. So I'm really happy to be part of it. I've known Danu from the magazine mainly and watched some shows that he has already hosted. I think it's really great for him to also talk about issues and bring people that talk about issues that are rarely spoken or are uncomfortable to talk about in the mainstream media. So I'm really happy to be hosted by him for this show.
So we have added one more person to this set, Niluka. So before we get into the whole conversation that we're having on Date with Danu, the Naked Truth edition, I would like to say that Niluka has to rethink Sriyal's friendship. Point number one, this boy came in just like this, school-going white pinstripe shirt, and he was just sitting there. And this one has come with his Kanchipuram sarong and the whole works. And I was like, didn't he tell you that it needs to be well dressed? It's like, oh, nothing. But this is a chance for you. This is a very crucial thing,
For me to rethink.
Yeah, you need to really rethink. So Nilanka, how do you know Sriyal and how did you all meet?
So Sriyal, I think I know him for 5-6 years now, since he started working for rights of LGBT people, equal rights. And I happen to also work in the same field. And then we bumped into each other. And then we've started working together on certain things. And I think, given that I will be rethinking our friendship, we will still be working together on so many things.
You don't have anyone else to work with.
So what do you do?
I work as the Communications and Coordination Officer for a regional network in Asia Pacific called the Global Fund Advocates Network Asia Pacific.
Right.
We work with a global financing mechanism called the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, Tuberculosis and Malaria.
Oh wow, okay.
And then our main work is around domestic resources for health and something called universal health coverage.
Brilliant. That's excellent. It's so amazing that more youth come forward to work in these sectors and create more awareness. One of the reasons I wanted to speak to you about one thing is the fact that so you became friends with him knowing that he was HIV positive.
That wasn't a pretext at all. I think I got to know that later on once we met. But I think, I worked around sexual and reproductive health, HIV, equal rights for gender and sexual minorities for a bit of time when I met Sriyal. So somebody living with HIV wasn't that of a big deal.
Yeah.
Like, it was just a side note. I happen to live with HIV and I'm like, that's fine, like, not a big deal.
Sriyal, do you feel it's essential that you have to sort of bring this up in conversation with people? Like, for example, like, how we know when we go out with friends and if one person is vegan and you're like, I'm vegan. Just so that everyone knows?
Depends on the context of the conversation. I tend to not do it anymore.
But you felt like it was like a... Like
there was a time where I felt I needed to. If not, I was worried about the kind of relationships that I built and if they found out later on how that would affect. It was there for the longest time with my family as well, my extended family actually, because I was playing with their kids and things like that. And I was a little weary about how they would react when they found out, and thankfully they didn't react badly at all. It was quite encouraging to know that I had the support of my family.
That's amazing. So HIV, you may think, when you go to Colombo schools, you get a chance to be exposed to it so often in terms of conversation, in terms of education, dialogue with your teachers, parents. It's not the case. I came out of school in the 2000s, and yet when we had a subject called life skill, where they skipped a whole education about sex, especially to the Tamil medium that I come from. They didn't even touch it. Like, those pages were crisp. And the Sinhala medium went for this whole, like a video presentation on it, and we never got it. Maybe they didn't have it translated, so they just omitted the whole conversation for us. But this actually happened to me when I was doing my O-level, and this is what that whole play that I acted for Hans in V-Day was scripted out of. Once when I was 15, not yet 16, I was going for my science class in the morning. It was around, it's a 6 o'clock class where they, to give those last few knowledge strings before your O-levels. I went to just to get some help. And I was going for this class somewhere in September, and there's a barber salon that I always go to since I was a kid in Vellavata down Hamden Lane. So the class teacher, the science teacher, very specifically says you need to bring 220 rupees, 200 rupees for the class and 20 rupees for the tute. If you take anything more, she might not give you the balance, or she'll just scold you. So mummy had a 500 rupees and she said, change it and go. So the only thing that was open at like 5:50 in the morning was this barber salon, because they do the whole puja thing in the morning. So this person who has cut my hair for the past, let's say, 1 year, who I kind of knew and I thought won't be like a disastrous human being, I tapped the door and said, can you change 500? And he said, yeah, come inside. The minute I went in, he locked the door and he exposed himself to me. And he grabbed my hand and he made me touch his genitals. The truth behind it is I screamed, I brought the roof down, and somebody tapped the door, and then he opened the door, I ran. But because I was not educated about HIV, I thought somebody who I do not know in society and who I will not know in terms of lifestyle could be a carrier, and by touching his genitals, I could have got HIV. And this is when I was 15, and I was just in fear. So as a result, I used to cut my hand and sort of wait to see if it will dry up. So I thought that means my immune system is still working. It was stupidity, but also it just shows that today when I sit back, I'm like, oh gosh, this is actually like this all the knowledge I had. Of course, then I prayed about it, went to the church about it, cried about it, and eventually told my mother, and I felt so comfortable with the fact that. But this, considering the fact that I was a Colombo school boy and I didn't know about it, makes me realize how far has this information reached out to the communities around. And as someone who works in this, island-wide, how much is spoken about this?
So, to start with the story that you just told us, it's not even about HIV, it's just simply about sexual and reproductive health. We need to start where we talk about what's a good touch and what's a bad touch. And none of us were taught that by our families, not at all at the school. As you said, it was good that some of your friends got to see a video, and when we were in school, we didn't have a video. Nobody really went through those lessons. Comprehensive sexuality education is one of the key things, not only to talk about sexual and reproductive health or about HIV, but to build yourself as a person, as an individual. You need to talk about what does interpersonal relationships mean. How do you maintain a relationship? How do you negotiate these things with your family, with your brothers and sisters, with neighbors, with your extended relatives? And in Sri Lanka, this is still a struggle. Like, we are in the 21st century, it's 2020, and when you talk about comprehensive sexuality education, everybody comes with like, this is our culture, you should not be talking to kids about sex. And we are like, hang on, it's not sex that we're talking about to a 5-year-old kid or 6-year-old kid. We are talking to the kid about
what's right and wrong.
What's right and wrong, what's a good touch, bad touch, who should be with you when you go to bathroom at home or somewhere else. And then we come to a stage where the 95% of women who use public transport get sexually harassed and abused,
Every day.
Nobody talks about it. Like, you talk about, this is why you need sexuality education, so people know what are the limits, people know how to negotiate this.
And don't you also feel it has become such a norm that women still get into the bus, they're like, how to deal with it, I have to just go to work.
Yeah.
It's just normal today, and it's not right.
It's
to
not
consider
right.
it right, to consider it normal. You're like, oh, what to do? It's not that they can take another transport, so just get into it and move on with life, which is quite a sad thing. We're going to speak a little bit more when we do come back. We're getting to a break. What we're going to be touching on is the fact that someone who is living with HIV can have the most balanced, equal life. And there's something called the antiretroviral therapy. How many people know about it? We'll speak more when we do come back. Stay. In conversation with Nilanka and Sriyal, a little bit about HIV and being positive about it. And this is the Naked Truth edition to Date with Danu right here on Hi TV. Thank you for joining us on the show, and we are going to speak a little bit about, let's speak a little bit about the difference between HIV and AIDS. Sriyal, I think you'll be the right person of it, because to give us the difference between HIV and AIDS.
So, HIV is the virus that causes
AIDS.
Well, AIDS is a condition. Basically, the HIV virus attacks your immune system and makes it so weak that it exposes your body to other opportunistic infections. So even a common cold can end up sort of killing you if your immune system is so weak. Different countries sort of define the stage of AIDS differently, but in Sri Lanka, I think it's your CD4 count has to be below 200.
Something like that,
for you to
yeah.
be at the late stages, right? Interestingly, statistically, when we find new HIV cases, we understand that over 50% or nearly 50% of newly diagnosed HIV patients have had the HIV virus in them for, say, 3 to 5 years.
And they just don't know about it.
They don't know about it.
And it doesn't show up either.
Yeah.
Right, let's go back in time. The day that you decided to go test yourself, why?
Okay, so I was sexually active since I was very young. I had my first boyfriend when I was 14. So since I mean, no one was talking about condoms, no one was talking about safety or testing, say until I was about 16, but then conversations started happening, people started talking about safety and things like that. So since I was 17, 18, I would test myself every 6 to 8 months.
Oh, okay. That was an initiative that you took by yourself.
Yes, in conversation with friends, other sort of gay guys, it was something that was encouraged.
But did you use protection during?
Yeah, on and off. I mean, with people that I didn't know, there was protection, and then there were people that I met and kind of knew. How well do you know someone that you have sex with? I mean, it's, as a gay guy, you put yourself in instances where you build relationships sexually, and you build a level of confidence where you sort of let go. So it was something like that that happened to me. I didn't personally know him, but sexually I knew him quite well. There was an affair that was going on for a couple of months. So I let my guard down. I wouldn't necessarily say I trusted him. I just kind of, I wasn't so careful in that sense. So I partly take responsibility for that. But so I was testing quite frequently, but I actually didn't. So I was in the States for a while. I came back. I was studying there, and after I came back, I hadn't tested for about 6 to 8 months. I got an allergic reaction, and during that time, my friend encouraged me, why don't you go and get your sort of STI tests done? I did go to one of the sort of prominent hospitals, and I got my full panel tests, and they asked me to come in for a repeat test. I wasn't suspicious. I didn't think what it was, so I went in, and then I gave blood. But I wanted to know why I was doing this. So they sent me upstairs to talk to the lab technician, because the people at the sort of blood drawing place didn't know how to engage in a conversation about it. And then the lab technician was like, oh, you know, HIV vendati. And then just like,
Boom.
Yeah, and I was like, in a corridor, like, out of the blue, you don't tell someone that, hey, you know, your life might be changing
From this
from
moment
this
onwards.
point. Yeah. So I made a complaint to the manager or the person at the hospital. It a huge fuss, because it was sort of, I couldn't
Fathom that they just dropped it like that.
Yeah, I think they could have done it a little bit better. Then I went back, I got a repeat test done at a different hospital. Everyone was really sweet there. However, then they have this thing where the results are given to you by another doctor. There was this old lady, doctor, I was with my friend, and she was like, her response was, naughty වැඩ කරපුවාම ඔහොම තමයි. I wanted to slap her across the face because I mean, like, that was the kind of judgment that was passed on me, and then I was directed to a venereologist who was extremely sort of interested to know if I had sex with my friend, if who else I had sex with, how I have had sex. I mean, I get all of that. Now I understand why those questions are being
To
asked.
just track down.
To track down, but to kind of build a sort of history around your sexual behavior so you can better provide services. But the way the questions were posed were very...
And you were not ready to answer them at that very moment because
No, I
you were
wasn't.
self-processing this information.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I only heard about HIV medication after I had sort of engaged with the National STD AIDS Control Program. So the system in Sri Lanka is that it's centralized, that anyone who becomes HIV positive is directed to the NSACP or the National STD and AIDS Control Program. Medication is provided by them or any other sort of HIV medication clinics in the country.
And how much is the medication?
It's free of charge.
Okay.
All sort of tests and investigations are all free of charge. Vitamins are free of charge. So they do sort of take care of people who become positive, which is an expense on the government. We can get to that conversation a little later as to sort of where that goes. But and that was the first time I heard about HIV medication and that you could sort of live, I mean, normal subjective, but you could live a healthy life. And I wasn't willing to take that information because it just sounded like
Not true.
Yeah, completely different to what I've been like hearing about HIV, completely different to what I've been hearing about AIDS.
Because HIV means people just thought death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, for years, I mean, still people think that they confuse HIV and AIDS as the same thing. We try to discourage people from talking about AIDS unless it's an actual sort of health situation, because it also, there's a stigma around the word. But I mean, even now, to date, it's very sort of baffling for us that with such a robust program that they haven't taken the initiative to educate the general public. They have this sort of habit of educating the key communities, the marginalized communities. But what we keep saying is that I might be someone who's living with HIV, I might belong to one of the key populations. However, my parents aren't, my siblings aren't, my extended family isn't. When I go to work, they're not part of the key population. They're general public. I, as a person living with HIV, have to engage with all of them. And if they don't know what I know, then they're not going to accept me.
And the way you know it. And you
Exactly.
can't force yourself on them.
Yeah.
Be like, no, everything is okay. And they will be like, no.
Yeah, and also they have this sort of adverse reaction to anything coming out of someone who's not a medical professional, because we have this such high regard of doctors and medical professionals that it's discouraging when they are the gatekeepers who sort of holds on to information without providing it outside. And I don't know if it's lack of will, lack of resources, but somehow it's us who are affected by that. And they don't understand, and they will never understand that until they are put in the same place as we are.
One question before we get into the break. Did you, in your system, blame the person who kept it as a secret from you?
I don't think he kept it as a secret. I think genuinely he didn't know.
Have you spoken to him about it?
I have tried, but as you know, the kind of the life cycle of sort of how gay men meet and have sex, he was someone who was referred or recommended by a friend, because you know how people exchange numbers, and then so he had changed his numbers. He was not on social media. He was someone who's working somewhere in Katunayaka. I tried to reach out, say about after I started going to therapy, actually, because my therapist said, you know, build yourself up, then you start sort of doing it. And
because you wanted to speak to him so that he will know about his status before
it goes to someone else, because the chances are that if he was having unprotected sex with me, he was probably having unprotected sex with others also. However, I couldn't reach him. So when I did reach out to the friend who spoke or sort of gave me that, I told him, like, you have to
Tell him.
pass this information on because I can't get in touch with him. And at the time, funny enough, that whole sort of clique of friends had found out that I was HIV positive because a friend of a friend had already told them and they had already tested themselves. I don't know what happened because I pulled myself out of it. I realized that I can't do everything. I needed to take care of myself also, but I thought I did what I needed to do by telling someone who possibly could speak to him.
A lot of information for me to process as well. Let's get into a break. On the other side, we're going to speak a little bit about, with the expert who is here as well, about what antiretroviral therapy is and how much is the government doing to look after this. I must say the government does a brilliant job in creating a comfortable environment for people who are living with HIV or any form of sexually transmitted disease in a very positive way. We'll speak more about it when we do come back. Welcome back to the show. Going to speak to Niluka.
That's correct.
I have apparently called him something else in the earlier segment. Sorry. I get a bit too invested on this show, Niluka. So, Niluka, tell me a little bit about, in your field, this whole antiretroviral therapy. So, what I know about antiretroviral therapy is the fact that it reduces the intensity of the virus in your body so that your HIV levels become like the infection that you might get out of saliva. So, it's not transferable to another person. Am I correct?
Yes and no. So let me put it more
Hans
clearly.
really tried to educate me. I have really let him down as a student.
He did a good job. So what the antiretroviral therapy, or ART, short form that we always use, what ART does is it doesn't let the virus replicate in your body.
Okay.
So when it doesn't replicate, you don't have so many viruses in your body, and at one time when you're on treatment properly, the norm is that you take a pill every day. So when you're on treatment properly, the virus level in your body gets down to less than 50 copies per milliliter, right? What that means is you become undetectable. That's what we call the stage. When you become undetectable, a person living with HIV cannot transmit the virus to another person.
So that means you can have unprotected sex as an HIV positive person.
You can have unprotected sex as a person living with HIV, but not transmit the virus.
Right. So that means you can live a normal family life, have children, and children can be with no
Not
HIV.
living with HIV.
Yeah. And even your wife or your partner will have
Yeah.
no problem. So it's
Exactly.
definitely the right way to go forward. How many people know about antiretroviral therapy?
So, good point. So this is the way to live, and HIV is not a death sentence anymore. You find that you are living with HIV, you get on treatment, and it's a program. It's not just taking a pill. But there are doctors. The national program is there to help you go through the process. You become undetectable, and you become just another person. As Sriyal said, using normal is a bit subjective, so just a person. Happen to live with HIV just like people living with diabetes or with cholesterol, and still take pills and manage it.
Up to now, we have more death rate for diabetes than HIV.
Yeah. And if you take something like tuberculosis, the most infectious disease in the world, it kills more people than HIV, I think. And we rarely talk about tuberculosis, like we're not really worried about it. So if you take the world, we have close to about 35 million people living with HIV, and close to half of that is on ARV, which is alarming. In Sri Lanka, we have close to 3,500 to 4,000 estimated number of people living with HIV, but only 1,500 or so is on ARV.
So this is tested 1,500 or tested
These
3,500?
1,500 are tested and registered and are supposed to be on ARV in Sri Lanka. This is the national data, but we have an estimation of close to 3,500 to 4,000 people living with estimated to be living with HIV in the
I
country.
think we have about 2,800, or there's another 1,500 that needs to be found.
Yeah,
right?
something
So
like 2,000.
So there is
yeah.
a group of people who are not yet detected or even traced.
Yeah, so basically based on the numbers that you find every year,
So you tend to see.
you project how many
How
people,
many people
are
are-
living,
yeah.
and then you deduct the amount of HIV related deaths reported. Unreported deaths, they've sort of hunted down and looked for people who possibly were registered but who weren't sort of connected, and if they have passed away, so they deduct that number. So they say there is an estimated number of 3,600. We have about something on the 2,000.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe I got a bit confused. 2,800 or something like that registered and on ARV Sri
treatment, yeah.
Lanka on treatment, but there's 1,500 who are not. So this number is the problem. There is that maybe these people, they don't know that they're living with HIV, so they're not on treatment. So the chances of them transmitting the virus to other people are quite high. And this is mainly because people are not aware that they need, if they are sexually active and if they are engaging in risk behavior that have the risk of getting HIV infected, they don't know what those acts are, and therefore they're not going to get tested.
There's also the fear, Danu, because most people are afraid of the test result and the life being changed
afterwards, yeah.
that they don't get tested at all. So they live in denial or of the possibility of thinking that it could happen to them, or they live in this sort of understanding that, oh, it's not going to happen to me, it happens to everyone else.
I think that also that, like, it's not going to happen to me, I'm not going to get exposed.
Yeah.
But I think this is where we also need to now talk about health systems in Sri Lanka. Like, so the government is paying for all ARVs, which is really great. But what we are doing, Sriyal and I in our work, is now we are pushing the government to invest more money into health generally in Sri Lanka and to increase the budget for the HIV response.
Right.
So that we can increase the number of people who are on ARV. And then we are also trying to talk to government on a concept called return on the investment. So the idea is you provide information to people, you prevent new HIV infection, so you don't have to put people lifetime on ARV, and that saves a lot of money for the government.
Yeah.
So this is something we try to tell the government through different means, and sometimes it becomes a bit challenging to talk about that as well.
Part of the contention is that, so there is PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis, which prevents you from getting HIV. However, the government understanding, or I mean, let's say the gatekeeper's understanding is that if you take PrEP, people will have more sex, more unprotected sex. There will be a rise of STIs, which most of them are curable or if not manageable. But there is this sort of cultural barrier where it's like, oh no, api PrEP do not then.
But PrEP is available.
PrEP, yes,
Will
in the
be
country.
available.
No, PrEP is available in the country at the moment.
At
It
the
has-
moment, yes.
Yeah, for people who, like, if your partner is HIV positive and you have a negative partner, until the HIV positive partner becomes undetectable,
You are on PrEP.
You
give
are
them
given PrEP.
So
But-
that means an unprotected sex will not damage you.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so the biggest conversation about giving PrEP for key populations or general public is that the number of sex that they have, unprotected sex, will increase. And oh Lord, like, what are we going to do? Right?
So are sex workers on PrEP these days?
PrEP is not provided to communities that have more vulnerability towards HIV right now. Right now.
Free of charge, you mean?
Right now. It's
At
going to
all.
start.
It's not even in the country in the sense
in
that
that sense.
you can't take
Yeah.
it from an outside pharmacy or anything like that.
Yeah. But a PrEP program is going to start mainly for two key populations, which is men who have sex with men and transgender women. And then it will be a pilot project, and in, I think, given a significant time, it will be expanded to include other populations, communities who are also vulnerable to HIV, more than the general public, as we call it.
Answering your question, sex workers have been sort of reached through the program very effectively, that their usage of condoms, their knowledge on HIV is fairly high. So you don't see a lot of female sex workers actually who are HIV positive. So they're
That means they are taking the right precaution.
they are taking the right precautions. However, if you want to talk about vulnerabilities, they are vulnerable to sort of violence and things like
abuse
that.
and things like
Yeah.
that.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to get into a break. When we do come back, we're going to speak a little bit about what globally that has been planned for HIV is the fact that to eradicate HIV positive cases by 2030, whereas we in Sri Lanka are trying to aim a bit higher with 2025 as a target.
Yep.
I feel so knowledge that time. But we're going to speak more about when we do come back, and the type of information that we tend to keep behind doors have to be spoken with like lights on. That's when we can actually break the stigma about it. When we do come back, please do that. Welcome back to the show. We are talking about HIV on Date with Danu, the naked truth edition to the show, and want to touch on the fact that globally by 2030 they're trying to eradicate new HIV positive cases, which means with all these kind of medications that PrEP, or it could be antiretroviral therapy, we are able to reduce the number and have a healthy society. But Sri Lanka wants to do it in 2025. Tell me about that.
Okay, so as you said, the world target to end new HIV infections is 2030, and this is in line with something called the Sustainable Development Goals, which the UN member states have come together and have decided on 17 goals in 2015 to achieve by 2030. And one of the targets in these goals is to end infectious diseases like HIV, tuberculosis and malaria by 2030. Now Sri Lanka wants to end this by 2025. Which is
Are we on the right path?
Before we get there, which is absolutely great. Good to have such a great goal ahead of you so that you can really pull yourself together. But in our opinion, I think what we see is we don't see the effort, because we are just 5 years ahead. And then we have to find 1,500 people who are estimated to living with HIV, get them on treatment, and also make sure that the treatment will be available with the government funds in the next 5 to 10 years and more than that. Why I'm saying this is right now Sri Lanka is funded by the Global Fund for the HIV response. Sri Lanka is not, the Global Fund is not paying for ARV, Sri Lankan government is paying, but a whole lot of other things are funded by the Global Fund, which is planning to leave Sri Lanka. We call the process as transition out of Sri Lanka in the next 5 to 6 years. This means Sri Lankan government has to invest in HIV prevention, which means buying condoms and lubricants, doing all those awareness campaigns, all the test kits, test machines, cartridges, everything. Now, as we see how this is happening, we don't see Sri Lankan government investing enough money so that we can reach the 2025 targets. This is where we also need to talk about, as citizens, irrespective of people living with HIV or anything, as citizens, how much is our tax money being used by the government, by the state, effectively to facilitate our right to health, irrespective of our conditions, right? So this is where we all need to gather up and push the government to say, look, right to health is a right of us as citizens. Sri Lanka has signed conventions that accept this health is a right. And then as the state, as the government, you really need to effectively use the tax money and invest it properly in the health sector and in HIV response. Before I give it to you, just a very small example. Sri Lanka boasts about a really good health system. But just imagine three of us, how much money do we spend annually on our health out of our pockets, right? Do we go to any general hospitals?
The hassle is too much.
Yeah.
You might, because you have to get the ARVs, but other than that, all of us, despite our economic conditions, it's the norm that you have to channel a private doctor at a private hospital, right? But we all pay taxes so that we should be getting our health benefits out of that, but we are not. So this is something that we all need to talk about when we talk about health, and then particularly about issues like HIV.
And the other side of that is the willingness, the advocacy around open conversations. We know people have sex. We know young people are having sex. I started having sex when I was, what, 14, 15. No one at this point even talks about protection. No one talks about testing. No one talks about sort of the comprehensive
Sexuality
sexual
education.
right? So I think as much as health services need to be sort of strengthened up, people need to be informed and educated. And there needs to be a much more stronger will to do that. It's not, it's one thing to stand behind culture and tradition, but these are evolving things. And at the end of the day, it's even if it's one person, one life, it's one Sri Lankan life that is going to be at risk if we do not sort of find better ways to sort of reach out and educate people to take more control of their sexual health and their own sort of life.
All right. Before we wrap things up on the show, I just need to ask you two questions. There's always a stigma about sexuality. And as a man who is openly homosexual, how was it for you when you had to also add HIV positive to it? Because of the fact that, you know, when you're homosexual itself, you have so many names that will just flood its way on social media platforms or wherever, you know.
Yeah, I consider myself to be pansexual, but I was the gay cliche though. Like, I am the boy that your mother warned you about. Right, like the gay.
There you go, the movie.
No, I mean, like that's what it is. The deviant sexual being who will going to give you AIDS, right? That's the sort of impression. I still have messages that comes into my inbox saying, "Didn't you die yet? Why don't you go kill yourself? What are you doing here?" And these are from people who are within this sort of communities.
And I always feel when it's said in Sinhala, it's so much more painful.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
It is so much more painful. You know, I always say when you call names like Pansia and those things are, it pierces more than, you know.
The or anything like that, because the word comes with a lot of baggage.
Yeah.
And I think what Sriyal said, and your question around when you're already associated with an identity that is historically marginalized, discriminated and violated, and you have to add another identity to it, things get really difficult. So when we talk about HIV, we talk about several communities as key populations. So in Sri Lanka, we talk about men who have sex with men. So this doesn't necessarily include only gay men or men who have identified as gay or homosexual.
Or
we include
bisexual.
Yeah, or bisexual. We include transgender women and sex workers and people who inject drugs.
Yeah,
and
also
use drugs.
just generally men who have sex with other men without taking on the identity of
Just for them it's just sex and nothing else.
But what we need to highlight here is that it's not only these populations who are vulnerable. Out there, anybody could be. So you need to take precautions. You need to get your information updated.
Finally, how is your family about all of this?
They want me to stop talking about it. I mean, politely, my mom asked me. Earlier, it was a big fight, but I understand why they do it, because they live in sort of with other populations, communities, society, and society finds a way to make them feel bad and make them feel like they've failed. Sweet enough, my mother said, you know, talk about your work, talk about what you do. Can we please move on from talking about yourself, because this is going to come back and bite us. But they're supportive though. I think because of that support only, I'm able to come out and talk and do this.
I'm happy that you did.
Yeah.
Because what you have spoken today and what you have spoken today is going to give so many people the will and the power to either go test themselves or have the courage to accept it and talk about it, which is the most important thing. Thank you so very much for having such a positive outlook to this, for being so open, being so candid, and speaking about something so sensitive. Thanks for all the knowledge that you brought to the table today. it really does mean a lot. Thank you so much for being here, and reconsider the whole
Yes,
shirt.
definitely.
This boy even had
The whole
yeah,
shirt
this,
issue.
yeah, this boy even had like a costume in the morning. I can't give him one of my shirts. He might be not be seen on this show. On that note, we need to wrap things up. Thank you so much for joining us on Date with Danu, the Naked Truth. We'll see you with another cool episode to this show. Till then, you keep smiling. It's a wrap.